World War II shaped the lives of a generation. The war broke families apart, brought communities together, and turned a depressed economy into an industrial machine. On the home front, citizens sold war bonds and collected scrap metal for the factories. Friends were made and lost as a generation of boys was sent into combat. Penn State Public Broadcasting invited those who lived this history to share their stories of World War II.
My name is Bill Sims. I was born in the little town of Bridgeville, Pennsylvania, which is just south of Pittsburgh. I spent most of my life, adolescence life, on a farm in Washington County. And then from there, I worked in the steel mill, and then I went into the service. December the 12th, 1942, I was asked to enter the service. I was drafted. My original plan was to enlist in the Air Force cadets and become a pilot. I went in for the exam on that, and they laughed at my flat feet, and I was no longer an Air Force pilot. So I went to the Marines, and they were hilarious at my flat feet. They kept calling other people over to look at these rockers. So I thought, well, I might as well go back to the steel mill and work. And I went back to there, and 2 months later, I was drafted. I was at the intersection of Brownsville Road and Route 51 in Pittsburgh, PA. I was coming home. My fiancée and I were coming home from an early horseback ride. We stopped for the light. That went on. When we pulled over and looked at each other, and I said, our lives will never be the same. And they weren't. I felt very uncomfortable not being in, because anybody hale, healthy was supposed to be in. And so I felt it was part of my job to be in. I went in at Fort Meade, Maryland, took my basic training on Miami Beach in Florida, which was really tough duty on December, January, and February. Then I went to weather school in Chanute Field. From there, I went to Rapid City, South Dakota, which was a B-17 air base. And from there, I went by train to New Jersey and was shipped out of New York to go to Australia. Well, I started out I was in weather, and then Australia was just merely a staging area waiting for things to get finished up in Europe before we did very much action from there. So Australia was a massive U.S. Army, Air Force, military base. They had thousands of them there. So I started out in the weather station, and then I sort of realized there's not going to be much promotion here. Everybody's here. So they were asking for people in personnel, and I transferred to personnel, and I became a personnel person in headquarters for 15th Weather, 5th Air Force. I have a South Pacific battle ribbon with 4 oak leaf clusters, which said it was 4 battles, but I didn't see any of them. I was well behind, but I was involved in 2 air raids, and so that was the extent of my actual action. Well, the first one was at Biak Island, and it wasn't much. Well, they were both at Biak Island. The first one was a plane flew over and dropped a bomb helplessly in the jungle and took off. And that was months later. I guess everybody thought the war was over because they were working up on the airstrip, working on airplanes 24 hours a day, all floodlights and so forth. And this one evening, several of us took the company truck and drove back into the jungle where the Red Cross had a donut and coffee shop. And we got that, and coming home we heard an airplane, and one guy yelled, "That's a Zero." And so we were out of the truck and in the slit trench. He flew over us, and he was no more than 150, 200 feet. You could look right up into the bomb bay. And he got about 200 yards past us. He just dropped his bombs in the dark and wiped out about 20 guys that were walking across a baseball field on the way home from that. That was the extent of my active duty, and action duty, I should say. I had the Good Conduct Medal. Naturally, I don't know whether I deserved it or not, but I got it. And I got a Marksman medal, and I'll tell you how I became an expert marksman. It's while we were at Camp Shanks, New York, ready to ship out. They got us up one morning, marched us out about 1.5 miles to the target range, and we were required to shoot one round, every piece of equipment we were going to be engaged with, like a sidearm or a pistol, a rifle, a carabine, and a machine gun. We got through with that. We signed the paper. We had done it, and we were marksmen. So that was how you became a marksman. But I had grown up on the farm, and I was very familiar with firearms, so it wasn't any problem. I got into Leyte 2 weeks after landing, and they had a colonel, Philippine colonel, be our indoctrination officer, and he spent 2 or 3 hours with us, and it turned out to be Colonel Marcos, who later became president of the Philippines. So I watched his career as we went through. But the shocking thing is when we got to Luzon and see what the Japanese had done. There wasn't one textbook of any kind in the Philippines. There were no newspapers, or practically no clothes. Practically all the kids ran around, especially the boys, with just a little shirt on and no pants. The food was terrible for them. They would come up and go through our garbage cans. The kids and adults would come up and go through our garbage cans looking for leftover to eat. And then finally, the government the army put fence around the fence. They didn't want kids coming down with all disease and so forth. And we used to sneak food out of the mess hall to them, and we got stopped from that. The Air Force told us, we're not here to feed them. We can't feed them, and you too. There's other programs for them, and they'll be taken care of. But some of the atrocities were outrageous. In downtown Manila was a 2-story building. It was a department store before the war. And they divided the floors into about 4-foot ceilings. And the people were jammed in there, were prisoners, civilians, prisoners. And that was kind of nerve-wracking to see everybody all bent over there. And then when we before we got to the Philippines, they started to bring prisoners out, former prisoners. And one of the tortures the Japanese used to use, they'd have a fireplace, like grate like you see in the fireplace, with a log fire in it. And they would put the GI in a sitting position and put this at his back and keep turning on more logs till he would scream what they wanted to know. And some of their backs looked like extremely well done roast beef. And so that was a shock to see him doing that. So there were just some of the atrocities that were going on. Well, I think it changed everybody's life. I was engaged to be married. My best friend was married, who was a B-17 pilot, was married to the girl I introduced him to, and she introduced me to the girls I was engaged to. So Herb and Betty got married when he got his wings, and he was flying bombs, B-17s out of Britain. And then you got either 25 or 26 missions, and you automatically were transferred back to the United States of domestic duty. Well, he finished up his missions, and it was going to be about a 2-week wait till he got home. One of his buddies was still flying and come down with the flu, and Herb said, "I'll take your mission." So he took his mission, and he was shot. His plane was shot down. Herb was killed in it. A lot of his crew got out, but Herb didn't get out. So, and then that certainly changed Betty's life, changed his life, of course. My life got changed when I got my Dear John letter. I opened it up after I'd been over there about 2.5 years and says, "Dear Bill, by the time you get this, I'll be very much married." And she was. So when I come home, I paid my respects and visited Betty. About 2 weeks later, I got a call from one of her friends, wanted to know if I would take her to the Capital Airlines dance. She worked for Capital Airlines, and I said, certainly, because she was a super dancer. And so we went to that, and then we started dating, and we got married in September. And we had a great life. I was discharged in Fort Knox, Kentucky, on the morning of December the 31st, 1945. I took a train from there to Pittsburgh. I had left my car in this automobile dealership garage. I had called them from the West Coast, and they had it ready for me when I got there. Got that out and drove home, and rang the doorbell at quarter to midnight, quarter to 12 on New Year's Eve of that. I think the night I got off the train in Pittsburgh was probably the loneliest night of my life. I got off the train. I was the only person got off. There was nobody else in the station but a couple GIs. And I went into the what they call the canteen. I was the only person in there, except the person serving coffee, and I washed up. And all the time you're in the service, you think of going home, think of meeting your fiancée or your friends or family, and having a reunion, say, in the station. Well, we didn't do that. But after I got home, everything was fine. They knew I was in the States. They didn't know I was coming that night. They didn't know when I was coming. I had called them from California. They knew I was going to go home. And, of course, my mother and dad met us at the door. There weren't many of our family there. During the war, my sister, who was a school teacher before, was a Marine, and I was in the Air Force. And the brother next to me was in the Air Force. He had terrible duty. He spent the war in Hawaii. Another brother was Navy cadets, and one brother was a regular Navy on the North Pacific Trail. Another was on the Coast Guard North Pacific. So there were 6 of us in the time at one time. And my mother, God bless her, wrote us almost every week, and not a form letter. We got individual letters. She must have spent half of her day writing letters. And I made every attempt to write her every week. I came close, but of course there are times you travel you didn't. And after I got home, Mother had made a book with every letter I had written her. I still have it. So I have my career in book form, as they were. And I think the thing that changed the United States was the GI Bill of Rights, which was the most wonderful thing that ever happened in this country. Before that, about 15% of the kids went to college. Now, what is it? 85 to 90% got some kind of college education. And it was due to the mass educational program for all our returning GIs. And millions of them took advantage. I didn't. I got married and went in sales. As Sherman said, war is hell, and it is. But it had to be fought. It just had to be done. And I think the war that's going on today is one that had to be done. And I hope and pray that they'll get some sign of semblance balance in the Mideast, because unless the Mideast is settled, there'll never be any peace in the world. And I think people have to start realizing that. So I recognize the horrible things of war.